Welcome, everybody. This is Dr. Grace Telesco, and we are recording from the Fischler College of Education School of Criminal Justice YouTube channel. And I am joined by my great friend. I have to say great friend because, he was first an acquaintance, and then we became sort of, collaborators, and then we became friends, and now he's my great friend. So I know that there's a lot of people that are followers of Ed, and a lot of our NSU, Nova Southeastern University School of Criminal Justice folks are big fans as well. Ed, I don't know if you knew that or not, but they are, and you're probably one of their favorites.
Wow.
As we have a lot of guests on, criminal justice professionals and experts from different fields within criminal justice. But this show, they really enjoy it a lot. And I know that I always like to say that Ed is the host of the show Unfound. Ed is a journalist, a filmmaker, an actor, and part-time disc golf player. I throw that in there.
That's right. You got to put that in there.
I know that he loves that a lot.
Imperative.
Absolutely. And so one of the things that I love about Ed is that he looks at cases of missing persons who have gone kind of missing for sometimes decades, right? And so he gives voice to these folks that are unfound, and there's the name of his show, Unfound. He not only gives voice to who they are, to these victims, but he also gives voice to the families, because you can just imagine what it might be like for a family member who has a missing person that they love, that they immediately call the police. The police almost often will say, you got to wait a certain number of hours before we'll actually take a report. And you can just imagine when you know that this is not just John left to go get a gallon of milk kind of thing. Like, that there's something wrong, that something happened, that a crime was probably committed, and you want the police to really do something imminently, right now, urgently, right? And the police have to follow their protocols. But you're going to find out that sometimes it's really difficult. Of all the cases that Ed brings up for us to share and listen to and learn about, we find out that there's some times that things have fallen through the cracks in terms of law enforcement investigation and maybe lack of follow through. And that might be for many reasons. And the bottom line is that it hurts. It continues to injure the family, right? Because as every day goes by and their loved one is not found, right? They begin to lose trust in the system, and talk about despair, and talk about grief, and talk about complicated grief, because for many decades a victim might go missing and never be found, and there's no remains even. Right. So you're not going to classify it as a homicide. And the family doesn't get that opportunity to mourn their loved one the way most people get to. And so that becomes something in psychology terms known as complicated grief. I have a little bit of experience with this when I was a first responder at Ground Zero for about a year and a half as a lieutenant in the NYPD. And as many of you do know, well, we're coming up on the 20-year anniversary soon, which I cannot believe. But one of the things that was the hardest for families was the fact that no remains were found. Now, we know that incident is a lot different than the incidents and the cases that Ed is going to talk about tonight, the case that he's going to talk about tonight, and the cases that he has talked about in the past. It's different because we knew that was a terrorist attack. We know it was a crime. We could place people at the scene. So that they've perished. And yet their remains were not found. So the same sort of dynamic happens for the families that Ed is working with, right? They don't have this opportunity to grieve because they're still holding on to hope that maybe their loved one will be found. And so tonight, let's welcome Ed Dentzel, the host of Unfound, with a very interesting case that he's going to first give us the facts of. Then he'll tell us anything that he might think and know, which he doesn't like to theorize. I know that. But I have some criminal justice majors with me. I even have a criminal justice graduate alum from NSU. And we'll, at the end of the program, toward the end, we'll go to them and we'll ask them what they think and see if they have any questions for Ed. Meanwhile, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat box, and my production team will make sure that we address whatever your comments are. So with no further ado, my dear friend and colleague, Ed Dentzel.
Oh, how are you doing this evening, Dr. Telesco? Thank you for that introduction. It's good to be with you again. It seems like we were just talking yesterday, but here it's already been a month since our last show. And I know David, one of your graduates, he graduated since the last time. So I want to congratulate him. I know he's keeping an eye on the program tonight. So congratulations to him. Yes, the disappearance that we will be discussing tonight is one that's very close to me, both literally and figuratively, because this is a disappearance that happened about 3 miles from where I sit right now. I live in Clearwater Beach, Florida. If you look at it on a map, if you can find Sand Key, I live just south of Sand Key. And this disappearance happened in Indian Rocks Beach. Like I said, it's about 3 miles south of me. And in fact, the building where Kelly Rothwell, the victim in this missing persons case, where she was living, this condo is almost right across the street from a mobile gas station convenience store where I usually buy my Mega Millions tickets. So I go by this building all the time. And in fact, where her car was eventually found is also a place that I go by all the time. In fact, it was almost right next to the post office that I use when I send out packages, books, and things to listeners and other people. That is the post office I use. Her car was found about less than 1/8 of a mile from there. So this area that we'll be talking about tonight, I'm very familiar with it. And so it continues to be in my mind because I'm going by these places all the time. And it is she's Kelly Rothwell. She disappeared from Indian Rocks Beach on March 12th, 2011. Now, you should know that even though I live close to where she disappeared, I did not live here at the time. I did not move to this part of Florida from Las Vegas until October 1st of 2011. So this happened about 6 months, 7 months before I moved here. But I was not in the missing persons business doing the podcast yet. And I was not aware of her disappearance until actually I started doing the program. But this is a disappearance that I covered very early in Unfound's existence. I think this might be disappearance number 4 or 5 that I covered, going back to October or November of 2016. And we've covered over 200 since. It's hard. It's just crazy for me to believe that it's been that long. It seems like yesterday that I covered this disappearance. And before I go into some important points that I think all of you need to keep your mind on as I tell you about the facts, and then we get into a group discussion regarding Kelly's disappearance, I want to urge all of you to go to TampaBayCrimeReport.com. The woman who runs that website, Lee Clifton, her first name is Leigh Clifton, Clifton. She is a friend of mine. I got to know her. She was the guest for the episode back then. She continues to be a friend of mine. I've actually met her, not recently though, in person. And she continues to cover Kelly's, what we believe to be murder. And she has been on this case, investigating this since day one, and has devoted her entire blog, even though it's called the Tampa Bay Crime Report, she has devoted it entirely to figuring out, to proving that David Perry killed Kelly Rothwell and where Kelly Rothwell is. So I cannot do this discussion, do this show tonight without mentioning Lee Clifton. Just doing a fantastic job. We need more Lee Cliftons out there doing this kind of work, because this is not her job. She has another job that she does full time. She does this blog investigation on the side. We need more people like that. She's done a fantastic job. So I cannot do this tonight without mentioning her and without mentioning her website. And she did a fantastic interview back in 2016. So the important points that I think you need to keep in mind as I discuss the facts of Kelly's disappearance are these. There's three of them, and this is, if you've watched our shows before, this is what I like to do. I try to be an educator when it comes to missing persons cases. We're not just doing this for publicity and to talk. The people who are watching this, I want you to learn more about missing persons cases in general, because that's what I believe is going to solve more of these disappearances. If the public understands disappearances better, it raises the odds that many of these disappearances are going to be solved. There's no doubt in my mind about that. So the important points that are particular to Kelly's disappearance. Number one, women are at their most vulnerable when they decide to leave a relationship. Number two, what's obvious is not always provable. And number three, never underestimate the evil that people will do. So the facts regarding Kelly Rothwell, and right off the bat, and I think this will be of importance to Dr. Telesco in particular, is that Kelly was going to the Pinellas County Police Academy. She was on her path, very close to graduating from the academy to become a police officer in Pinellas County. Pinellas County is where St. Petersburg, Florida is. It's where Clearwater is. It's where the stadium for the Tampa Bay Rays baseball team is. That is where I live, Pinellas County. And she was going to the academy, and she was very, very close to graduating. She was not married at the time. She has no children. She has been described, though, even though she was going to the police academy, she's been described as being a little bit hippie-ish. She drove a Volkswagen Bug that my understanding, she had like flowers inside it, something like that. She was not, if you were to meet her, you would not maybe automatically think that she was on the verge of becoming a police officer. But she was. It was very important to her. And she wanted her concentration eventually to be working in a special victims unit, in particular domestic violence. And I believe that's fairly ironic, given what we believe to be the circumstances of her disappearance. Well, at some point, she had met, the story goes, is that sometime, of course, before 2011, she had met a guy's name is David Perry. And the story went that she was at a Sweet Tomatoes, which is kind of, it's a restaurant chain. I don't know if they have it all over the United States, but it's here in Florida. It's kind of a buffet, healthier buffet type of restaurant situation where it's a big salad bar with soups. They also have ice cream for desserts and everything, but it's kind of an all you can eat type of situation. Well, she was there with friends, and this David Perry was there, and he went up, approached her, just did not know her, and said that he wanted to get to know her. And they started a friendship that eventually became a romantic relationship. What's confusing, at least a little bit, although we'll get into this in a bit, is that David is not from Florida. He's actually, at the time, he was a resident of New York. And to this day, nobody is quite sure what he was doing in Florida at the time that he met Kelly. So they met, and they began this relationship. And to hear friends tell it, and this is what Lee said in her interview way back in 2016, is that immediately people noticed a change in Kelly. Although there were no outward signs, that the relationship was abusive, mental, emotional, or physical. Around David, she just did not seem to be herself. Not as hippie-ish, I guess you might say. Not as talkative. Kind of let him take everything over. And over time, people would discover that then when they would go over to Kelly's, and Kelly lived at this house from where she disappeared down in Indian Rocks Beach, right there on the beach, that she was renting a condo there and she was living by herself. Then David moved in. That David was very controlling. He had what you could call OCD, in that he vacuumed. We've heard like several times a day. He would not allow people to put bottles of water down on counters, etc. There was the carpet had to be vacuumed a certain way, so there were particular design or something in it. And you get the feeling that not many of Kelly's friends liked him very much. And in addition, her family, who did not live in Florida, still does not live in Florida, did not like him very much either. But Kelly continued this relationship with him. And in fact, what eventually was discovered is that when David went up to Kelly and started this friendship that became a relationship with her, he was actually dating another woman at the time in New York. And the story goes is that as soon as he met Kelly and things were going well, he went back to New York, broke up with this woman, and said, yeah, I'm going to live with this rich, word that rhymes with rich but starts with a B, in Florida. That's what he said. And I'm guessing that Kelly didn't know how he referred to her. So he moves everything from his belongings from New York, moves in with her in her condo in Indian Rocks. And you should know that Indian Rocks Beach, it's a fairly, it's on the beach, so you can understand it's a fairly nice area. Maybe not as nice as like Bel Air Beach, which is just north of it, but a really nice area. It's not a cheap area. The condos are not cheap to rent. The houses there are not cheap. It's a really, really nice area, but that's where Kelly was living. And he moved right in with her. And it was obvious, I think, from the start that the only reason he was there with Kelly is because of where she lived, and the not so much her probably, but just the area, and that he gets to live in this really nice area. Now, on top of that, you want to know about David and his work. Officially, at the time that he met Kelly, he was on disability. And allegedly what happened, he was a corrections officer at a prison in New York, and there was some sort of prison uprising, fight, some sort of riot. And during this riot, he allegedly got hurt. However, there are some severe doubts about whether he got hurt during this or not. But he successfully filed for disability, and it was granted to him. And so at the time of him meeting Kelly and her disappearance, he had no job. He was just kind of hanging out down here, and he would pick up part-time jobs here and there, I think just for the heck of it. In fact, I have in my notes here, had in my notes when I spoke to Lee, as that he maybe just took a part-time job at Outback or something like that. So they were dating. She's going to the academy. She's getting very close to graduating, but family and friends were noticing this big change in her. Even though she continued to go to school and she was doing well, big change when they would be around her. And so the story goes is that on this day, March 12th, she had gotten together with a friend at an local Applebee's. It is an Applebee's that I've actually eaten at. I know where it is, not far from where I sit right now. And she told this friend of hers that she had had enough and that she was going to break up with David, once again, for everything that I've already talked about. And there were probably a lot of other things that went on that nobody to this day knows about. And she was going to go home. David's back at the condo in Indian Rocks Beach, and she's going to break up with him. And so they left, they parted ways, and that is the last time anybody ever saw Kelly. Now, what was discovered is that she did call David before she got home. The belief is that she was making sure he was home, so should know that he was home and to make sure he was home because she had something to tell him. Well, what happens is that neighbors in this condo, and I know that I sent the picture to Dr. Telesco. If she wishes to post it at some time, she can. But it's a 2-story building that has at least 4 condos in it. Not a small building, not a large building. But the story goes that neighbors heard her car pull in. They heard her go up the steps to the second floor. There's not an elevator in this building. And then shortly after that, they heard a loud thump in upstairs. So they're on the second floor. This would be the people that are under them. So this people's ceiling, it would be the floor of the condo of Kelly and David. They heard a huge thump, followed shortly by a bunch of scrambling around and then vacuuming. And at one point, this neighbor, this downstairs neighbor, considered, what's going on up there? But this guy did not want to. He was an older gentleman, and he and David had had words before. What had happened was that David had bought some grill, huge barbecue grill that he had put out somewhere, and it was against HOA regulations. We know how HOAs can be. And this downstairs neighbor turned David in, and David found out about it, had to get rid of the grill, and then he had threatened this downstairs neighbor. And because of that, he did not want to go upstairs if there was something going on. He was afraid of having confrontation with David, who he was, frankly, I think this older guy was afraid of David. So chose not to go up there. And so there was vacuuming, and then everything was quiet. And that was about it. Well, what had happened was Kelly, of course, she got together with this friend earlier in the day. She'd called ahead to see if David was home, got home. Well, she had plans with friends that evening, and she didn't show up. And they tried calling her, texting her, no answer. And so eventually people started to get worried. And then the next day, she was supposed to show up for school again at the academy. She didn't show up. And then that's when, this search started for her. Her family, started to find out that she hadn't shown up for the friends, she hadn't shown up for school at the academy. They went over to her condo. David's car was not there. Her car was not there. Eventually, what was discovered is that her car was eventually found, and it was found down the street. I've once again given a map to Dr. Telesco. She can put it up there. Not quite 2 miles south of where they were living at the time in the condo. There we go. There's the map right there, and that little red spot at the bottom. If she puts it up there, will show where her car was found. Kelly's car was found not quite 2 miles south of the condo. And as I mentioned earlier, this area is right by the post office that I go to. I pass this spot all the time, and every time I think of Kelly. And allegedly, there was at least one witness who saw David that evening, maybe just a couple hours after Kelly should have gotten home, jogging back to the condo from the general area of where her car was found. But this was not unusual because David was known to go jogging, even though, as I stated, he was on disability. Well, they find the car, really no information. They start wondering, well, where David is. The police are now involved. The missing persons report is being filed. And it turns out when they finally do track David down and get his phone number and call him, he's already back in New York, in Elmira, New York. So no more than maybe 24 hours after Kelly should have gotten home, maybe a little more than that, David had already driven back to New York. And if anybody doesn't know, anybody watching this, I know for me to drive where I live to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, to where my dad still lives, 16 hours. To Elmira, New York, 20 hours, 22 hours. And he was already there when they finally tracked him down. He was asked about Kelly. Her car was there, and he had nothing to say. And to this day, he's had nothing to say. When they finally did go into the condo, they found everything to be pristine. There was the smell of bleach. There was no signs of violence, no blood on the floor or anything like that. But certainly the place smelled as if somebody had gone from the ceiling to the floor, scrubbing everything down, carpets, everything. I'm just scrolling down here. So most importantly, maybe a telltale piece of evidence in this case is that Kelly and David would go kite sailing. This is maybe windsurfing, kite sailing, where you're on a surfboard and you're kind of holding these handles, and there's once again a kite, and that kite is pulling you across the water. Very popular sport here in this area because it's always fairly windy here at on the water, and you can really get going very, very fast. Well, a kite sail bag was missing. They found the sail, never found the bag. Well, one of those bags just happens to be about 5 feet long, and Kelly was about 5'2". And in doing my interview with Lee, her belief, and a lot of people's beliefs in this particular disappearance, is that David killed Kelly and put her in this bag and then put her in his car. Some of the other things, now we also have to remember that he made it back to New York in a very quick amount of time. So in thinking about this, if we are to believe that David did something to Kelly, that she could be anywhere between here and New York. It's a very tough, difficult situation. It's a very unique situation. I've never covered a disappearance like this. I've covered some other disappearances where you believe that somebody was murdered, and it's fairly obvious, as one of the points that we'll be discussing, that I think everybody should keep their minds on tonight. But for a suspect to try to get away from the scene that quickly and to go that far is certainly unique. And once again, we've covered over 200 disappearances. Kelly's phone and purse, like she, are also both missing. They've never been found. They were not in the building. They were not in her car. Eventually, investigators from here in Pinellas County did go to New York. They did check David's car. Nothing of relevance was found to her disappearance. And once again, David has not offered any reasons, any theories, his own theories as to what could have happened to Kelly. And he is fairly, he's sly like a fox when it comes to these types of things. He knows how to work the system. Not that we're going to get into that in this discussion, but I'll talk about that in a bit, at least a little bit. So he went back to New York, and he's never come back to Florida since her disappearance over 10 years ago. We just passed the 10-year anniversary. Well, it was just a few days after Kelly went missing that Lee, who was working, doing freelance work, I think for Patch.com, got involved. And she just happened to run into Kelly's mother who had come down, I think, from Maryland to the condo. Lee showed up there, and they just happened to run into each other. And that's how Lee eventually got on this case by her own choice, getting to know Kelly's family, and has been on it ever since. So what has Lee done? Just she's done many things, but I'll just go through a few things. She has hounded David Perry the whole way back to New York. Lee tracked down David Perry's ex-wife, and she said that at many different times, David had strangled her, had threatened to kill her. And this is the why, at least the reason, at least in Lee's mind, that if we are to believe David killed Kelly because she was going to break up with him, that he did strangle her. That seems to be his method. At least he talked about it and actually did it to his ex-wife. So it makes sense that that is the choice he would make with Kelly, in addition to the fact that nothing, no signs of violence were found in Kelly's condo. There's no amount of cleaning. If should have been shot or stabbed, there's no amount of cleaning that would be able to make those things, hide the blood evidence. There was nothing. So it is believed that if David did kill Kelly, that he strangled her to death. And that bang that the neighbors heard was probably her body hitting the floor. Now, Lee, once again, in hounding David Perry, and she continues to do so to this day. And if you want to see her blow by blow account of what she's done over the last 10 years, once again, Tampa Bay Crime Report. Let me read that for you again, tampabaycrimereport.com. But she's been through a lot. Lee has been through a lot. A lot of friends of David have gone after her. They've hacked into her website account, her email. She has been tormented by David and his friends over the last 10 years because she will just not let this go. It even got to the point Lee has so much been on David Perry's trail, making sure, keeping track of his every move. And keep in mind, Lee lives here. She lives in Pinellas County like I do. She lives at the southern end of the county. That she found out that he had met a new woman, and this woman was in the military, and this woman was going to be moving to Hawaii to be stationed there. Lee found out about this and called the commander of the base in Hawaii and letting him know that he was going to have, I think it was the Army, a soldier on his base that was in a relationship with a murderer. And these are the things that Lee has done over the last 10 years. I like I said, we need more Lee Cliftons out there for disappearance cases. I cannot say that enough. So kind of put the kibosh on that, moving to Hawaii. And you should know, over the last 10 years, David has been in and out of jail. He's gotten caught with insurance fraud, all sorts of different things. He is a bad guy. And maybe to top this all off, it still goes back to, what was David Perry doing in Florida at this time when he met Kelly originally, even though he had no residence here? And it is believed that he was doing drug running for people in the state of New York, coming to Florida, getting drugs, taking them back to the state of New York. And that is something that I think Lee believes. I think she has proof of that. And but David, although he's in jail now for other crimes, he's never had to answer for anything regarding the disappearance of Kelly Rothwell, a disappearance that is probably one of the surest cases I've ever covered on Unfound of murder. And that she's not been found. And unfortunately, once again, Kelly Rothwell could be anywhere between here and the state of New York. So those are the facts of Kelly Rothwell's disappearance. Once again, this happened on March 12th of 2011. So we just passed the 10-year anniversary just a couple months ago. So there you go, Dr. Telesco.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. I think you're right. I think of all of the cases that we've looked at, we've examined together, it seems to me like this one in particular really points to domestic violence
Yeah.
and points to homicide. I'm
Mhm.
wondering if we have any information, a little bit more information about what law enforcement, what their interview was like of him when they went to New York. Apparently,
Uh,
you don't just jump on a plane
yeah.
without really having this as your suspect.
Yes. Well, they did. They went there. They checked out his car and everything. But like I said, once again, we'd have to get into more of the other things about everything that David has done since then, which really is not part of the disappearance. It's just part of his life. But he is one of those guys who knows how to work all the angles. And being that he was a corrections officer, I think it is unfortunately helped him deal with these situations where he has been interviewed by law enforcement. Because being a corrections officer, although it's not technically the same thing, it is kind of the same thing. And he's used to being in those situations. He knows how to work the system. He knows of course, has been friends with police officers in New York, knows how they work, how they think, how they do in their interrogations. And I think that that has worked in his favor in these times that they have talked to him. I also know that he is lawyered up, and he's had so many other issues since Kelly's disappearance that he's so busy, kind of fend off other crimes that he's committed, insurance fraud, etc., that I really don't know how much, at least recently, let's just say within the last 5 years, he's even been asked about Kelly's disappearance. I think early on, yes, but he's had so many problems with the law since then. He's in jail now and can just lawyer up.
Yeah. I don't know if our viewers know that domestic violence is among one of the greatest and most likely to be committed crimes.
Yes.
That despite the fact that crime trends seem to point toward going down, especially when there's an economic boom, um, the truth of the matter is that domestic violence and sexual assault continue to rise. In fact, I believe that the 2021 statistics say, according to the CDC, that one in four women, especially, will be victims of domestic violence. And so it's interesting. I wonder if there was any reports, and I don't know if we know this information or not, if there were any reports prior to the incident happening between these two, if there were any 911 calls that were made. Do you know about
No,
that?
no, I think this is a situation, and this is not uncommon, is that I think Kelly kept this to herself. I think that many women maybe are embarrassed by it. Unfortunately, they worry about the stigma of something like that. In addition to the fact that here she is, she's going to be a police officer, and she's suffering this domestic violence, um, and maybe is embarrassed, by that kind of, I don't know if you'd call it a paradox, but irony, something like that. But no news that ever came out that anything like that ever happened. I happen to believe, had that happened, the way I feel about David Perry is that if that was a situation, he would have killed her long before that. I think he sounds like the type of guy that if she would have called 911 or something, I think he just would have done something to her right then.
You mentioned in earlier in the facts when you were as you were presenting the facts that he had some domestic violence incidences with his ex-wife.
Yeah, but I don't know if they were ever documented. I don't know if even Lee knows that. Did police ever show up at their house? I don't know that. All I know is Lee did talk to his ex-wife, and that's what she talked about. Of course, they were divorced. They had at least one child together. Um,
We're talking about
yes,
his former wife, right?
former wife, yeah. But I don't know if there's any, proof of that regarding any police ever showing up at his house or not. All we have is her word that this is what he would do.
one of the other interesting things about domestic violence is that, number one, if if you're a batterer, if you're an abuser, chances of you continuing to abuse is great. It's not just like confined to one relationship, because we know
Right.
that the dynamics of domestic violence are such that it's about power and control issues. And
Yeah.
I think that one of our viewers was saying something about his domineering. David Perry is really bad news, very obsessive, controlling, chose strangulation since he doesn't want to make a mess, appears to be a sociopath to me. Well, very obsessive, very controlling. Those are two characteristics and attributes that are any abuser will have those. And I also want to just say for our viewers that while women are more likely to be victims of domestic violence, it doesn't mean that men are not also victims. And
Right.
while this particular case is kind of zeroing in on and focusing on a heterosexual relationship, it doesn't mean that same sex relationships
Of
don't
course.
also have domestic
Right.
violence. In fact, domestic
Absolutely.
violence kind of crosses all socioeconomic, gender, race,
Yep.
ethnicity. It just crosses. It's an equal
Everything.
opportunity kind of traumatic event, right? So
Yes.
the attributes and characteristics of someone who is abusive, while I appreciate your viewers saying something about a sociopath, it could be, it could be for sure a sociopath, but also that this is so typical of abusers.
Right. And we have covered some other disappearances that could be connected to violence, or I should say, women wanting to get out of relationships and then they go missing. Just some of those, if the listeners have not, new people to the program. Suzanne Lyle, Tiffany Johnson. Her ex actually is in jail for kidnapping her. She disappeared. Her remains have still not been found, but he went to jail for kidnapping. That's in Texas, I believe. And then going way back to the 1980s, I think there's a good reason to believe that Amanda Fravel um, went missing because of a breakup of a relationship that she was in. But that's just a personal theory that myself and a couple of my assistants have. So we've covered some other ones. Maybe they aren't as blatant as Kelly's, but we've certainly covered some others. And we can't forget from a few months ago when we talked about Robin Abrams, Dr. Telesco, and that was a situation that was involving a relationship, but I don't know if it was necessarily domestic violence. It had more to do with Robin being in a relationship and then wanting to file sexual harassment lawsuit, and then she went missing. So kind of the same, but not quite. But we've covered a few over the 200 disappearances. But Kelly's really sticks out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think another thing that I want to just kind of highlight here is that you mentioned trying to get away. So when one of the things that a lot of people, criminal justice students as well as just lay people, ask the question of is why do people in domestic violence situations stay? Doesn't make any sense, right? You wouldn't accept that. You wouldn't accept somebody punching you in the mouth while you're standing on line, at the bank. You wouldn't
Yeah.
accept that, but yet we accept intimate partner violence. So why is that? Why do people stay? I mean, it used to be why do women stay, but I don't like saying it like that because we know that there are various kinds of victims and
Right.
various kinds of survivors. So what makes the victim stay is very complex. One thing is dependency, one thing is fear, because we also know the statistics show that you are more likely to die from a domestic violence incident
Mhm.
if you are about to leave.
Yep. Very
So those
dangerous. Yes.
very dangerous. It's a very dangerous
Yes.
situation. You're also more at risk if you're a woman and you're pregnant,
Right.
if you can believe that.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
Um,
absolutely.
And the
Yeah.
other really important thing for our viewers to know, for everybody to know, is that domestic violence doesn't usually start with physical violence. It almost is always preceded by psychological abuse,
Yeah.
emotional abuse,
Yeah.
not letting you out, not letting you hang out with your friends, checking your phone messages, checking your emails. These are things that in the beginning might sound like, oh, he loves me or she loves me. And look, she's really concerned and checking on me. But no, it's not really that. And you
No.
have to have a little bit of a red flag that goes up. But unfortunately, what a lot of survivors do is instead of a red flag, they see a red rose and they keep taking this individual back.
Yeah, I think that once again, I think it's great pointing out that this is just not something that for heterosexual relationships. This happens in all types of relationships. Absolutely true. And I think that the victims don't realize that they are being manipulated. You know, it's all part of a very long-term plan, and they don't realize that.
Right.
They think that, once again, they think it is something loving and everything, but this is the way that these people get inside. They're master manipulators.
Absolutely.
They know exactly what they're doing. They are not amateurs at this.
That's
They
right.
are professionals.
And
And
it sort of aligns more with hostage taking, if you
yeah,
will,
yes,
because with hostage taking, there's the Stockholm syndrome, which
yep,
is, the victim somehow aligns with and really feels connected to
yeah,
the hostage taker. And it's the same thing in a domestic violence relationship where the survivor is really the hostage, and the
yeah,
hostage taker is the abuser.
yes,
Now,
yeah.
I'd like to bring on our criminal justice first, our alum. So criminal justice alumni, David Troxel. If you are there with us,
There he is.
there you are. I'm actually going to stop the spotlight. I'm going to remove the spotlight and I'm going to give this gallery view so that our
Wow.
viewers can see everybody. And
Okay.
David, what's your take on this case?
Oh, wow. Well, first off, thank you so much to both of you for having me on the episode. There's so many things that have been said about this case already. It's hard for me to come up with any kind of new information. Like you said, Ed, this seems like a open and shut slam dunk case.
Mhm.
It is a classic case in my mind of domestic violence with the potential that this person, who unfortunately has the same first name as I do, in my mind, could even be a serial killer. This person, like you said, is a very slimy individual who knows all the ins and outs of the system and how to get around things. In my mind, he may have very well, and like what has already been discussed, the most dangerous time for someone to dealing with domestic violence, the most dangerous time is when they attempt to leave. And this being Kelly's condo, she would have had to kick him out, which is, even worse.
Yeah.
In my mind, it seems like you said, open and shut case, to where I would say most likely there was some sort of blunt force trauma involved or strangulation. And, very likely that bag was used to move her body. Her car, seeing how it was found relatively close and him jogging back from the area, these are all huge red flags to me.
Yeah.
That stand out, obviously. And in my mind, just from hearing this case tonight for the first time, I would have no doubt that this individual should have been the prime suspect. And it's just incredible that charges, I'm assuming, were never brought against him.
No, there were none. There have been none. And I don't know if there ever will be. We cannot underestimate the decisions that prosecutors make. So many of them do want bodies before they'll even think about bringing murder charges against anybody. That's very,
Right.
very common. I'm not saying we know that people are convicted of murder without bodies all the time, but it's considering how many murders and disappearances happen, it's still a very, very small percentage.
Right. Now, I do have a couple of questions for you.
Mhm.
As usual, I always like to, and I apologize for cutting you off. If you'd like to finish your comment.
That's all right. Go ahead.
Of course, I love to ask you the technology questions. Was her cell phone ever tracked? Did they ever try to use any type of technology to help locate her, or anything of that sort?
Well, I would say that they probably did, but we have to remember that her purse and her cell phone are still missing to this day. As I've stated before, David Perry, although he is evil, he is very smart. Okay.
Right.
He is crazy like a fox. And it's funny that you would bring up earlier the idea of a serial killer. I have to admit that Lee and I have had the discussion. Is it possible that he has killed other women? I think that is very possible. And if he has, then he knows, especially if before he met Kelly, then he would know these things to do to cover up his tracks.
Exactly.
Okay. And really, as he did cleaning up the condo and taking off, that's a lot more work than just taking a battery out of a phone and then pitching it in some lake somewhere. That's a lot easier to do. So he did the very complicated things. So he obviously then did the very simple things too.
And that's another concern of mine, Ed, is with him having such extreme obsessive compulsive disorder, I wonder what other mental disorders he may have that may have gone undiagnosed, or maybe they are diagnosed, that could lead to this sort of violence towards women.
Well, the thing is, I don't know if he was ever officially, medically, diagnosed. I don't know if he ever sat down with a psychiatrist or anything, but these are lay people talking and knowing him and what they would encounter. And so it's more of a lay person's understanding of what we normally think of OCD type of situations, having to have things in a certain way, things lined up parallel, cleaning. That's just the way he was. So I don't think there's ever been any official diagnosis. It's just that it really sticks out to all of us when we do encounter it.
Yeah.
Right. Unfortunately, it sounds like a classic case of domestic violence gone wrong.
Right. Thanks, David. Not that domestic violence can ever go right, unless
We
the
know what he said.
survivor.
No.
I know, unless the survivor is able to actually escape and get out and get help. And so, at the end of the program, I'll kind of maybe summarize some references and resources that folks can use if they know of someone who is the victim of domestic violence. I'm going to call on now Brendan and Patrick. Brendan Callanan and Patrick Fagan, and I want to introduce them to you, Ed, and to our viewers, because I'm very proud to say that these two are criminal justice majors at Nova Southeastern University, Fishler College of Education School of Criminal Justice. Really going to be so excited to say that we're going to be working together from now until who knows. So, when you say David and Josh have gone on, they've left the nest, they've flown out of the nest, and they've graduated and on to bigger and better things. Well, Brendan and Patrick are going to be the new David and Josh. So without any further ado, Brendan and Patrick, do you want to just maybe talk about what some of the viewers are saying?
Yeah, of course. First of all, I just want to say hello, everybody. Thank you so much for having me on tonight. This is an amazing program as always. What I noticed in some of the viewers and also myself's comments were kind of like the sociopathic nature of David in this. The way he was very smooth, calculated in every move that he did. And also kind of how he worked his way into her life extremely quickly. It seems like from the moment that they first met, he was in the condo and then broke it off with his former person.
Right.
So it's just very interesting. It makes me wonder if he's done this before, like you said, with other women, maybe how he just worms his way into what he wants very quickly and is very manipulative from there.
Yeah, I think that's a very, very good point. From the first time that he saw Kelly, I'm not saying that it was in his plan to kill her, but certainly a way to work his way into her life. And as long as she responded to what he said and what he did in a certain way, he knew what to do. If at any point she had acted a different way, I'm sure that he would have moved on to some other woman who was more open to his manipulation and everything. But being that she continued to go along with it for whatever reason, whatever psychological reason, that had to do with Kelly herself, I don't think we'll ever know. But as long as she went on with it, he was willing to continue to do it, to the point that, yes, he's living in her condo with her and controlling her life. Yes.
Absolutely. Like, especially with the comment he made to the other woman he was seeing in New York, about her being rich and stuff. It almost seems like
that's right. Yes.
Saw some resources that he wanted and knew that he had like the sociopathic ability to manipulate his way into her life to get
that. Right. That's right.
Yeah. I just wanted to also thank you for having me on. This is a great case to listen to. It was very interesting for me as well, being from the area. I'm born and raised in Hillsborough County and lived in Pinellas County for 2 years. So it was really interesting to hear that. And I also, all the questions that have been going on during this whole thing, does seem like he's probably done this before, with those tendencies to want to take an advantage of a situation to where he was benefiting. And I had a question also, wondering if you thought that maybe the difference in the state lines mattered into them questioning him further, because it does get tricky when you cross state lines.
Yeah, that's a great, like that. Fantastic topic. And we run across this more than probably people would think in the disappearances we cover on the program. The fact is that jurisdictional issues can play a huge role in disappearances, not being solved. It certainly would have been easier if David Perry was a Pinellas County resident, had no connections to New York, lived here his whole life, even if he did abuse his first wife. But if he was a resident of this county, I think that this disappearance, I'm not going to go to the point of saying it would have been solved, but certainly I think it would have been handled a different way. And in addition, there would have probably been a lot more logical choices as to, well, if Kelly's missing, where could she be in Pinellas County? The problem is that he went to New York. So you're right. Absolutely right. Not just from a law enforcement point of view, but just from a logistics point of view, from searches and everything else, it made it way more complicated than, way more complicated than you would like. Yes.
Right. I assume he's incarcerated in New York.
He is now, not for anything having to do with Kelly's disappearance, but like I said, he's done all sorts of stuff, stealing stuff, insurance fraud, you name it. He's done it. I don't think it's anything violent that he's in jail for, but he's in jail.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that would make sense then, because if he's incarcerated in New York, it would be a lot more difficult to try and solve something that happened in Florida way far away, and the body easily could have been dumped in any of the states that he drove through. So right. that was my question.
Yep. Great one. Good one.
So I have a question from one of our viewers, Twinkle. They were wondering if, although you said that it was very hard to prosecute like the no body cases, but wouldn't there be enough circumstantial evidence to maybe at least bring a case against him in this situation?
I know who Twinkle is, and I thank her for the question. You would think. It's just hard. It's just so hard to say. As Twinkle knows, I did an interview with Tad Tobias over 4 years ago, who I consider to be the nobody expert in the world. He's a former federal prosecutor. He's made his specialty helping on murder cases where there are no bodies. And, the tough part is that there's no signs of violence. If the apartment had, been blood everywhere and stuff broken and everything else, then maybe we would be able to, say that, yes, you could bring charges against David Perry. But being that everything was so clean, no sign of violence in the condo, no signs of violence in the car, etc., it makes it difficult. And everything, as I said, is one of the points for everybody to think about, is that everything's so obvious until you get into court and there's a defense attorney and he starts making the point, this point, that point. And before you know it, you have reasonable doubt. And that's the only shot you get at David Perry. I think that my belief, my opinion is that the reason he put her car where he did is because there's a canal there. There's a waterway right there. And he was trying to make it look like, yep, she jumped in the water. She was all distraught over our relationship breaking up. And she went in and jumped the water and drowned. I think that's what he was trying to get people to think.
Of course. And speaking of kind of like where she may have ended up, another one of our viewers, Kathy, stated that she believes that he may have placed her in New York so he could have more control over like the whole scene and everything, especially where that kind of follows his motto of having strict dominance over everything.
That's right. I think that with people who are OCD and controlling and need things a certain way, because if it's not, then, they start to, think, they start to have weird behavior. I think that's a very high possibility. Yes. That he would want to keep Kelly's remains close so that he could keep an eye on them. Yes. Good luck proving that, but it makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. It kind of fits his like MO as with his past and everything.
Yeah. Great. So, Patrick, I was wondering, did you have any other comments to say? If not, that's okay. Brendan, any further comments?
I believe that's all I have for now.
Okay, great.
Yeah, that's all I had for now. Sorry, I'm having a little computer trouble.
Yeah, super. Okay, great. Thanks. You guys can go off camera. What I want to do, Ed, is at this point, if you don't mind, I would like to share my screen with you. And I'd like to point out to our viewers that, especially since we were talking about Florida, now this is Women in Distress, and Women in Distress is located in Broward County. There's a 24-hour crisis hotline that it's definitely something that you can call. You can reach out to them. They can also hook you up with services that may not be in Broward County, maybe in Pinellas County or some other county in Florida. The other place that I wanted to show you is the Florida Resource Center for, let's see if I can, still coming up as Women in Distress, but are you aware of any resources that are near you?
I have to admit, I've not looked into that. I have not. There probably are. Surely there are, but I've not recently looked into that. No.
Yeah. So Stewart and some of these other places are still on the other side, right? But
yeah, those are on the east coast of Florida. Yeah.
But one of the things that I want to just, make a point, real important, is that if you know of someone who is in a domestic violence relationship, you might want to talk to them about something called a safety plan. And a safety plan is getting a bag together, having an idea of when you escape, if you can escape, where you would go, having that kind of agreement with your friend, right? Or your family member, and pack a bag, put in it the documents that are most important, your identification, any medications, your passport, perhaps anything that, is like super valuable to you. Put it all in the bag and leave the bag with that person if you can. And so then this way, when the time presents itself, if you can get out, do. So that's the whole point behind that. If you can get out, do. Get out and call 911 as you're on your way to your friend's house or this safe place that you've prearranged. 911, very important. Why? Because again, from a law enforcement perspective, we want to make sure that the suspect is caught, that the suspect is brought to justice. You also might want to let your friend know. And I'm also speaking to you, if this is happening to you in your relationship and you're thinking, oh, wait a second, this person has been checking my phone. This person has been not letting me go with my friends or giving me a really hard time about it. and that there's a lot of arguments around this. And and this person seems very, very jealous all the time and very, very possessive all the time. And this person may have shown and exhibited some signs of violence in the past to me. What I want to like caution you about is that this will only get worse. It progresses over time. It doesn't get better. And that there's this kind of, the honeymoon stage, right? Which is, oh, I'm in love with this person. I love this person. They're so charming. And usually manipulative people are very charming, by the way. Then there's the explosive stage, right? This conflict rises in within the relationship, and then it turns really nasty. A healthy relationship should never be turning nasty. We're not talking about regular old arguments. We're not talking about that. That's normal. Conflict in a relationship, it's normal. But when it starts to turn to violence, and when the person that claims to love you is putting you down, is ridiculing you, is criticizing you, is calling you names, things like that, or threatening you, making threats, maybe threatening to take your children away, maybe threatening that I'm going to divorce you and you're never going to see these kids again, maybe threatening that they're going to hit you, right? Or if you have immigration status that is questionable, threatening to tell immigration authorities. It runs the gamut of what the abuser can use in their toolbox against you. So if this is happening to you or to someone you know, get help before it's too late. It's only going to get worse, ultimately culminating in, God forbid, your homicide. So 911 is good. Law enforcement, almost all agencies have a domestic violence officer or a unit, depends on how big they are. The other thing that's really important is go to the court and get a restraining order if you can. In some places, in some jurisdictions, it's called an order of protection. And some of you might be chuckling and saying, wait a second, I don't know if I really necessarily have a lot of faith, right, in that. And the reason that I may not have a lot of faith in that is because an order of protection is maybe not necessarily going to give me the immediate protection I need. What are you going to do? You're going to hold up the order of protection while you're being strangled. You're going to hold up the order of protection while you're being shot at or stabbed. This is why it's so important to document with law enforcement. Document. Insist that the officer take a report. And if the officer says, well, no crime has been committed here, insist, I still want a report taken. Because then you can take that documentation, bring it to the court, get a restraining order. And the minute you spot this abuser anywhere near you, call 911 immediately. I'm also a big proponent of self-defense. So, defend yourself, take a concealed weapons permit class, learn martial arts, jujitsu, whatever it is. Sometimes the easiest thing, like having hairspray and spraying it in somebody's face, might just do the trick enough for you to be able to get out and run and call 911. Ed, any final comments that you might have?
On Kelly's disappearance, here's one thing that I would add to all of that. The way I look at her disappearance, I think the big mistake that she made, if we're to believe that David Perry killed her, is that she called ahead. I think what happened, my opinion, the way I would decipher it, is that she called ahead that day to make sure that he was home. Well, every person who's ever been in a relationship knows that call. We need to talk, and he probably knew what was coming. I mean, he knows that he's been doing things to her, and he knows that she was just talking to a friend. And here she is calling him saying, hey, are you going to be home? Because I'm coming home. Every person. And I think he was already prepared for what she was going to say to him once she got there. And so I think, and just in those minutes, it might have only been 20 minutes. He might have said, if she was breaking up with me, I'm killing her. And so she actually gave him time to think about his plan. Whereas I think that if she'd have just sprung it on him right there at that second, maybe she has a chance to get away. But I think that because she called ahead, I think that he was already prepared for what he was going to do. He already made preparations in those minutes. It's the way I decipher it.
Yes. And so I just want to make one little comment that I'm reading in the comments box here in the comments section. And David, thank you for clarifying, David Troxel, that it's not just the ladies that need to defend themselves. It's gentlemen too.
Mm-hmm.
It's all of us. All of us
Yeah.
need to have situational awareness. All of us
Yes.
need to be aware of our surroundings at all times and be able to defend ourselves if we can. Now, some of us can't defend ourselves because we're maybe part of a vulnerable population, like the elderly, for example.
Yeah.
But the elderly have a cane maybe, and they can hit you with the cane. The facts are, though, that women are much more likely to be seriously injured.
Absolutely.
So that while men batter women, men batter men, women batter women, women batter men, it goes all ways.
Mm-hmm.
That bridge has like no gate on either end. It can go both ways. But more importantly is that women, because they're vulnerable, older folks, seniors, because they're vulnerable, people who are disabled, who are more vulnerable, people who are, as I said earlier, immigration status questionable, are vulnerable because that can be held against them. So all of these things are important for us to remember. I want to say thank you so much to our audience for being with us as usual. Thank you again to David and Brendan and Patrick. You'll be seeing more of Patrick and Brendan in the years, months and years to come here. But David is always invited back. David and Josh always have a ticket, right? Right, Ed? They always have a ticket.
Oh, absolutely, of course.
To our programming. And so, Ed, last words, anything?
I just want to remind everybody that if they'd like to hear more about Kelly's disappearance and all the work that Lee Clifton has done over the last 10 years, please go to Tampa Bay Crime Report.com. It's a fantastic blog. Lee does such a great job, and she's going to keep on until David Perry is in jail and Kelly is found. Other than that, we have a new episode coming out tomorrow, the disappearance of Toby Anderson, a 16-year-old from Selma, Oregon. So it's a 35-year-old disappearance case. We have a new episode of the monthly program Unfound now coming out tomorrow of a woman who disappeared this past February in Texas. And the program continues to do very well. Please go to Facebook, the group, the page, Instagram, Twitter. We're in all of those places. And I hope to see Dr. Telesco again next month.
Absolutely. And one more thing, shameless plug, is that NSU, Nova Southeastern University, has fantastic programs at the undergraduate level, at the graduate level, and at the doctoral level. And in fact, our CJ master's degree is ranked 41st according to the U.S. News and World Report. And you say, well, that's, that's not first. But that's out of however many hundreds and thousands of programs. So it's a pretty prestigious thing that we have there going for us. And I could tell you, maybe David could tell you, he doesn't have to share his screen, but he could just chime in, that the undergraduate program is pretty remarkable. He's shaking his head.
Absolutely. I thoroughly enjoyed it and would highly recommend it to anyone who has a passion for public service and who would like to help others.
Great. Thanks again, David, for being with us tonight. And thank you again, Ed. We'll talk about our next show next time. Be on the lookout. And thank you so much for your viewers. Please, if you have not already subscribed to our channel, to do so. All you got to do is go up and hit subscribe and then hit the bell for notifications. Thank you again to everyone at Fischler College of Education School of Criminal Justice and everyone at Unfound. Thank you, Ed.